and Rav Tiferet will make this available to people. So basically what I wanted to do, what I was asked to do was do a 3-part series on the structure of the Siddur, the structure of the worship service, the flow of the worship service, and to do it in 3 one-hour sessions. So I'm going to be presenting the structure of the Siddur, the basic rubrics around which it's built, my philosophy, my approach to the formal communal worship service, and also to private worship. And I'll be talking at some point among the 3 about the difference between what makes a communal worship and a personal or private worship. What is the difference between the structure of communal prayer and private prayer? But the structure is the same, whether you pick up the old Union Prayer Book, Reform Prayer Book, whether you pick up the Reconstructionist Prayer Book, whether you pick up the Chabad Prayer Book, doesn't matter what Siddur, what prayer book you pick up. And the word Siddur, of course, means order. Everybody has the same order, which developed over centuries and pretty much became set about 1,000 to 1,500 years ago. But it was built on worship that was already in the Mishnah from 500 to 800 years before that, which was probably built on the worship that was part of the temple service, where most of that worship may have been, in fact, the Psalms. But we have in the Torah, for example, we have examples of temple worship, one of which is in the Haggadah, and in temple worship, it had nothing to do with the Haggadah. And that is, Avadim, a wandering Aramean was my father, and all of the story, and we went down to Egypt, which we read in the Haggadah, and it comes from the Torah, where God says to Moses and Aaron, when the people have offerings, they will bring them, put them in a basket and bring them to you and hand them to you, and you will say, a wandering Aramean was my father. So clearly that was a liturgical statement during the sacrificial period of the Torah period. So worship goes way back, but it got set into what we now call the worship and pretty much was agreed upon in the structure. I view worship as a spiritual aerobics or a spiritual sport. And as with any kind of other activity or exercise, you don't just jump right in. You have to warm up and stretch and prepare and do practice exercises. And then you have to actually do the thing. And sometimes there's one form of activity or exercise, and then there's a separate activity and exercise, and then there might be another activity or exercise, and ultimately you have to cool down before you walk away. So you don't walk in, do it, and walk away. And the same thing with formal worship. There's going to be warm-ups that we'll get to in the next session. There's going to be the actual activity, which is what today is, and then there's going to be the cool down, which will be the 3rd session. So having said that, and as I say, there's a lot of material. Here is just the middle part of the worship service, the Shema and its blessings, and the Amidah. And if you have questions as I go along, hit your raise hand button or something, and I'll try to answer it if I said I don't have everybody's picture up, or just do a little, can I ask?
And can I ask,
yes.
Will you share that with us so we don't have to try to?
Yeah, so this
Thank
material is on PDF, and this will be available for anybody who emails me, or I'll be sending it to Rav Tiferet, and she can send it out to the entire group, however that works best. But certainly anybody is welcome to email me with any questions or any material that you would like. So we've gotten through the warm-up, and the warm-up can be anywhere from 25 pages to 1 paragraph, depending on what service you're in. And the structure is exactly the same, whether you're in the morning service of the weekday, the morning service of Shabbat, the morning service of a holiday, and the evening service of a weekday, the evening service of Shabbat, the evening service of a holiday. The structure is always the same. The basic rubrics, the Shema and the Amidah, actually were developed separately. One is the Shema, which we are told we have to say twice a day. Why twice a day? One of the traditional answers is because in the Shema, and the Shema, by the way, when we say the Shema, we're actually talking about the Shema and the Ve'ahavta, which is one paragraph in the Torah with no interruptions. And in there it says, teach these words, speak of these words, reflect on these words when you lie down and when you rise up. And already 2,200 years ago, the rabbis were arguing. The key arguers were, of course, Hillel and Shammai. And the argument was, do you say the Shema when you're lying down and when you're standing up, or do you say the Shema at the time that you would lie down and at the time that you stand up? And Shammai said, you have to stand up for the Shema. And Hillel said, you have to say the Shema in whatever position you happen to be in at the time it is to say the Shema. But it was morning and evening, and so the morning service developed around the Shema, and then there were blessings that developed around the Shema as part of the worship service. And the morning blessings, here is Shacharit. In the Shacharit, the morning service, the dawn service, there are a total of 3 paragraphs of the Shema that we'll look at. There are 2 blessings that come before the Shema and 1 blessing that comes after the Shema. Down here in the Ma'ariv, the evening service, the Shema and the Shema is 3 paragraphs again, which we'll look at, but there are 2 blessings before it and 2 blessings after it. And that's basically the difference between the morning service and the evening service, is how many blessings surround the Shema. In all cases, the first blessing before the Shema is the blessing of creation. The second blessing is the blessing of revelation. And the third blessing is the blessing of redemption. And that again is the same in the morning and the evening as far as the themes of the blessings around the Shema. But in the morning, the blessing of creation is the blessing of light, Yotzer Or and Yotzer Hamaorot, which we'll look at. And it's fairly long on weekday mornings, and it's even longer on Shabbat mornings. So you'll get a sense of that. We're obviously not going to look at every prayer. We're not going to look at every reading. We're not going to look at which readings went into the Reform, which way readings or were included or excluded from the conservative, from the Reconstructionist, from the humanitarian, from the Chabad, from the Art Scroll, from the Nusach Ashkenaz and the Nusach Sephard. One of the things that is common is all Jews agreed that there's a structure to worship, and after that, there was no agreement at all. After that, you argue about which goes into it and what doesn't go into it and what after you do. But we're going to look at the basic structure. So in the morning, when the sun is coming up, you bless God for light. In the evening, the creation is a creation. When the sun is going down, you bless God for the transition from day to night. The evening prayer, by the way, Ma'ariv Aravim, I translate as either evens the evenings or bounds the boundaries, because the Hebrew Ma'ariv and Aravim are the same word. And usually Ma'ariv is translated as evening, and Aravim would then be evenings, it's plural, but it's the same word that gives us the Eruv. So it's the boundary time between day and night. It's neither day nor night, it's the boundary time. And the morning service, there's also a boundary time, which is called the Shachar, the dawn, but most people don't get to see the morning boundary. By the time you get up, the light is up. But in the evening, you watch that boundary develop as the sun sets, but the darkness doesn't yet come. So creation, then revelation. In the morning, we say a prayer of Ahava Rabbah, with great love. And in the evening, we say a prayer of Ahavat Olam, with love of eternity, or eternal love. Both of them are actually prayers of God so loved us that God stuck 613 commandments on us. And that's the impact of the revelation came to us from God's love. Then we have the Shema in the middle. And then the third blessing is the blessing of redemption. And again, there's a morning words for the blessing of redemption and an evening word for the blessing of redemption. One of the questions that often is asked is, why is the morning redemption prayer different from the evening redemption prayer? Why is the morning revelation prayer different from the evening revelation prayer? And rarely is that question asked about the morning creation prayer, because that one makes sense. The other two make no sense at all, really. One of the answers that I buy into is, at the time that these structures were being developed and were being filled out with specific prayers, the rabbis had two prayers of revelation that were so popular, they couldn't get rid of either one of them and didn't want to do them both at the same time. So they stuck one in the morning and one in the evening. Very typical Jewish response. When you're given a choice, the rabbi said both. So I know there's a lot of material here, and I know that we have a very broad range of experience and knowledge about worship in our group. So sort of trying to make sure that we're all somewhat on the same page. So if this is known to some of you, that's wonderful. Then to give you a sense, the morning blessing is Yotzer Or. God creates light. So that's why it's called the Yotzer Or. And then there's a prayer about light. And then there's another prayer about how great God is. What I wanted to point out is some of the ways in which the weekday and the Shabbat differ. And again, it's more on length, what's in and what's not in, than it is on any other theology. The idea is on Shabbat morning, you have a lot more time to just sit there and read a lot than on weekday mornings. So notice, for those who know Hebrew, this black group is an alphabetic acrostic. El Baruch Gadol Deah, Aleph Bet Gimel Daled, Hey Vav Zayin Chet Tet. It's the alphabet with one word in praise of God. A Payetnu, a Jewish poet of many, many centuries ago, took that prayer for Shabbat and expanded it into an entire reading. And only the first word from that prayer, El Baruch Gadol Da'at. And so they then did each of the words from there and expanded each word into an entire verse. That's typical of what happens on Shabbat. Some extra things get added in, got built in. So this is not even the full morning prayers. It's the full morning prayers on weekdays. It's not the full morning prayers on Shabbat. Other things are added in, but you can see how many pages you get in the first blessing before the Shema, before you even get to the second blessing of Shema. One of the things that I'll be pointing out is, notice in the middle of this first blessing in the morning, we have Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. And you may know that, you may recognize that from the third blessing of the Amidah. And you will find in the worship service, there are things from other parts of the service that are thrown in to different parts of the service, have been added in. There are a lot of historical development questions about that. In the morning blessings, for example, the Shema appears in the morning blessings. Even though we're only supposed to say it twice, we actually say it about 3 times just in the morning service. And there are different historical implications and explanations for that I won't go into at this point, but just there's the morning creation prayer, all of that. The evening creation prayer, weekday and Shabbat, that's it, right there, the whole prayer. Nothing gets added on Shabbat. And we'll talk about Kabbalat Shabbat as it was developed. But remember, in the morning, you're on your way to work, so you get up early enough that you've got about an hour before you have to get to work. In the evening, you're on your way home from work and you're hungry for dinner. So the evening service, an Orthodox service leader can often get the entire evening service done in 10 to 15 minutes. One of the jokes among the Orthodox at Hebrew Rehab when I was there was if they could do the Yom Kippur end of the service Ma'ariv in 5 minutes or less, because you still had to do it before you could go break your fast. So the evening service is very short. The second prayer, in the morning is not as long as the first prayer, but it does go on a bit. You always know when you're at the end of a blessing because it's going to end with a Baruch Atah Adonai and then a recapitulation statement of what the whole blessing was about. So if you ever want to know what your blessing was saying in the encapsulated form, all you have to do is read the last line. And this is Habocher ba'amo Yisrael ba'ahava, who has chosen the people of Israel in love. The evening second prayer is even shorter than the morning second prayer, second blessing. And this one simply says, Ohev Amo Yisrael, God loves Israel. And then there was the Shema, then there is the Shema finally. The Shema and the Ve'ahavta are one paragraph, again in the Torah. There is no Baruch Shem Kavod in the Torah. It's just one solid paragraph in the Torah scroll. And so the Shema and the Ve'ahavta comes from Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 4 through 9, with that Baruch Shem inserted. The second paragraph, which starts with the words V'haya im shamoa, and it will be if you really pay attention. And the first one is Shema, listen, and you will love. The second paragraph, if you really listen, and much of what is said in the first paragraph in 6, 4 through 9 is repeated in Deuteronomy 11, 13 to 21, when Moses reiterates the statements from chapter 6, but now puts them in the plural. In the first paragraph, it's done in the singular imperative. In the second paragraph, it's put into the plural imperative. And then the third part of it comes from the book of Numbers, so it's not nowhere near the Deuteronomy, and is a Vayomer Adonai El Moshe, and God said to Moshe. And this is the paragraph that specifically talks about putting a fringe of blue on the corners of your garments. So the first two paragraphs contain things that become the tefillin. The third paragraph becomes the thing that became the talit, the tzitzit. And then again, the evening service has different blessings for the morning third blessing says true, emet v'yatziv, true, and the evening third blessing says emet the emunah, true, emet. But again, two different ways of approaching the truth. Again, you'll notice the morning third blessing is quite a bit longer in the weekday and on Shabbat, but it ends with a reiteration of the song from the Song of the Sea, Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai, who is like you, O God. So if you get to Mi chamocha, you know you're now at the third blessing around the Shema. You're coming to the end of the Shema rubric, and this was the Song of the Sea in the evening. and much shorter in the morning, rather much shorter in the evening to get to Michamocha. And it still, again, has slightly different statements around the Michamocha. So again, that's probably because two different people in the fairly same time composed these additional readings around Torah passages, and they put one in the evening, one in the morning. One thing to note is that the order of the blessings around the Shema starts with creation and then moves to revelation. Then we say the Shema, and we say Emet, it is true, and we move to the redemption prayer. Creation, revelation, and redemption are not in chronological order. Chronological order was God created the world, God redeemed us from Egypt, and God revealed to us at Sinai. But the prayers then are in probably what the rabbis consider to be theological order rather than chronological order. And again, the structure, no matter what prayer book you use, the structure will always be some form of creation reading, followed by some form of revelation reading, followed by the Shema in some form, followed by some form of redemption reading, and pretty much any prayer book will have the Michamocha to close out the redemption reading. But before you get to that, you have to get ready to pray, because you've finished your warm-ups and you need some kind of announcement of we're no longer in the warm-up, strengthening, stretching, practice part. Now we're really doing our activity. And so we're going to call people in. We're going to make the announcement to shift to our activity, and that is the Baruch Hu. And Baruch Hu, the first line, which is said by the leader of the service, as a plural imperative, you will bless God who is to be blessed. And everybody responds by saying, Baruch, blessed is God who is to be blessed. So basically, the leader says, okay, everybody, it's time to really pray. And everybody says, okay, we're ready to pray. And then the leader repeats that second line, because the leader is not the leader. The leader is simply the representative, the one who keeps us more or less on the same page. And in different uses of Siddurim, some leaders tell you what page you're on. In a more orthodox or traditional, the leader will call out a few words to let you know whether you're at the beginning of one blessing or at the end of another one. And that tells you where you are in the service. So let me take a quick break there to see if there are any questions about that particular kind of structure that anyone has.
Rabbi Sam, what about the afternoon service?
Haven't gotten there yet.
Okay, we are getting.
So the rubric of the Shema is to be said twice a day. So the rubric of the Shema became the nucleus of the morning and the evening service.
Okay.
When we get to the Amidah, which is the next half hour, that was then to be said, according to the rabbis of the Mishnah, 3 times a day. And therefore, how do you get 3 times a day plus 2 times a day? Well, you can do the Muslim style and do it 5 times a day. Or you can do it the rabbinic style and combine 3 plus 2 equals 3. So the morning Amidah and the morning Shema became 2 parallel rubrics within one service. The evening Shema and evening Amidah became 2 parallel rubrics within one service. And the Amidah, the third Amidah, the middle one, became its own rubric. And so aside from the actual Ma'ariv service, the other short service is Mincha. Mincha, the only reason Mincha is longer than the evening service, if you do them only as they're written and at full speed is because there's more words in the Amidah than there is in the Shema and its blessings. So but the Shabbat Mincha, which we'll get to next week, the Shabbat Mincha, which should be very short, got a lot longer because they stuck a Torah rubric into the Shabbat afternoon. So we're going to be looking at that as well. So yes, we will get, Mincha comes next. So where you are in the service in the morning, because depends on whether you're warming up, have gotten past the Baruch Hu, are around the Shema, or have moved on after Micha Mocha, which means you've gotten to the next thing, which is what we'll talk about next. Any other questions about, I know it's a lot to take in, and as I said, this will be, the PDF page will also be, both the Hebrew and the English will be available to people. The Hebrew, I did not put a translation in, but with the English overview outline, you can pretty much then go to any Siddur, whether you have a hard copy or you go to an online Siddur, and you can see the structure to play out in any Siddur. But yes, the words will change depending on the Siddur that you look at. The structure will be the same. So you'll always see a Yotzer in the morning in any Siddur, whether you see interpretive passages, whether you see some of the paragraphs left out. You'll always see an Ahava, whether it's interpretive or some things added or left out. You'll always see some form of redemption, which will end with the Micha Mocha, and what leads up to the Micha Mocha, again, in a different Siddurim, will be different, but they'll all be at the same place within the worship service. One final then part of the evening service is, remember I said in the evening it's 2 blessings before and 2 blessings after. And so the 1, 2, and 3 before are the same 1, 2, and 3, creation, revelation, redemption. But the 4th one is the Hashkivenu, which literally means cause us to lie down. And that, again, we have to go way down. After evening 3, we have evening 4. And evening 4 is specifically an evening prayer. Let me lie down, the shalom. Let me go into my lying down time to shalom. And as long as I'm talking about lying down, I'd like to wake up tomorrow morning too. And so the second is V'ha'amidenu, raise me up, God, to life tomorrow. So let me lie down for shalom, and let me wake up again in the morning. And that's basically the Hashkivenu. And again, you want to know what it's really talking about. It's God is spreading over us a shelter of shalom. And this last line will change between the evening weekday service and the evening Shabbat service. Otherwise, it's the same paragraph to close out. Then there are some additional paragraphs that got into some traditional Siddurim that I'm not going to go into, but you're still at the end of the Shema and its blessings in the evening when you're in a 4th set of blessings. The only thing I actually like to point out in the evening blessing, because it's very rarely translated in what it actually says, and that is this, well, the haser, which means cause to stay, remove from, cause to keep away from me, Satan. And the liturgy specifically says Satan. So keep Satan from before me and from behind me. Satan milfanenu umeacharenu. Keep Satan away from in front of us and behind us. And that is the Satan of Job and some of the prophetic writings. But it's often translated as adversaries or bad stuff or ill will. It's translated in different ways. But in the evening, we actually pray that, and it, by the way, is not Hasatan. It's not a proper noun, and it's not a name. It is Satan, a Satan. Keep any Satan away from me. And Satan in the Tanakh, and then in rabbinic literature, Satan is the opposer, the opposition, the things that keep us from going the way we are supposed to be going. So that's all the evening prayer for the Shema. Then we have, all right, here it is, the Amidah, which starts with an opening. The Amidah is a series of blessings, series of praises of God, series of petitions to God, asking God to do for us that are from the Mishnah. They are not from the Torah. And the rabbi said, before you say them, you should ask God to open your lips and your heart to sing God's praises. The Amidah is called the Amidah because it said standing, and therefore Amidah means the standing blessings. And the Mishnah talks about, do you have to stand for them? And only if you are in a place where it's the time for the Amidah and you fear for your life, do you not have to get off of your conveyance and stand up for it. Otherwise, you have to stand up. You have to stand up for the Amidah. The Amidah is also called the Shmona Esrei, which is the Hebrew word for 18. And in the Mishnah, it talks about the 18 benedictions, the 18 blessings. However, no Siddur of any variety has 18 blessings in the Amidah. The traditional one has 19 for Shabbat, for weekdays, has 7 for Shabbat, has 9 on the high holy days, and never 18. That's a whole nother topic of discussion. But again, the structure of the Amidah is the same whether you're in the morning or the evening service, and now in the afternoon. Because the Amidah, we are told you had to say 3 times a day. You had to say it in the morning, you had to say it at Mincha in the afternoon, and you had to say it at Ma'ariv in the evening. However, in the morning and the afternoon, it's done out loud, and in the evening, it's done silently by each person separately within the community. And the first 3 paragraphs of every Amidah, morning, afternoon, or evening, are the paragraphs of Avot, Gevurot, and Kedusha. Avot is a reminder of the righteousness of our ancestors, literally patriarchs. And so in some non-Orthodox, they've added the Imahot, the matriarchs. Gevurot is a praise of God's might, and Kedusha is a sanctification of God's name. And again, the form of the Kedusha will change depending on whether you're saying it silently by yourself or part of a community. The Kedusha, when it's said out loud, has a much longer form than the one line that said if you're saying it in the evening by yourself. So the morning and afternoon services will have a long Kedusha, and the evening service will have a short Kedusha, but it will always be the third. The middle group, which is 13 petitions on weekdays, 1 praise of Shabbat on Shabbat, and 3 praises of Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur on the high holy days, the 1 and the 3 replace the 13. The 13 are petitionary prayers. God, please do this. God, please do that. Please rebuild the temple. Please sound the great shofar. Please heal those who are in need of healing. They got eliminated from the Shabbat and high holy day Amidah because you can't ask God to work on God's day off. So we praise God, we butter God up, then we ask God for all sorts of things on weekdays, and then we'll have the last 3. On Shabbat, we praise God, we butter God up, and then we say, boy, isn't it nice that we've got Shabbat, and then we do the last three. So we can't ask for things on God to do things for us on Shabbat, was the theology that developed around the middle 13. So you will only see the middle 13 if you're doing a weekday service. Then the last three paragraphs of the three and then middle and then three, the last three paragraphs are a prayer for the return of God's indwelling presence, the Shekhinah, into Zion, a thanksgiving for God's presence in all of creation, and a praise for God's gift of peace, which in the morning is Sim Shalom, in the evening is Shalom Rav, and in the afternoon is either Sim Shalom or Shalom Rav, depending on which authority you happen to go by. So there was an argument whether the evening was a Sim Shalom time like morning, or whether it was a Shalom Rav time like evening for the afternoon. The afternoon service can be done anytime after it's no longer time to do the morning service, and anytime before it's time to do the evening service. The morning service was defined by certain aspects of light. When in the morning can you start? How late can you say it? And it was usually up until around noon that you can say the morning service. The evening service had to be done when it was in fact evening, after the sun had set, when you were in that boundary time between the end of day and the beginning of night. Therefore, you've got anywhere from 3 or 4 hours to 7 or 8 hours to say mincha. Many congregations, because they don't have people come to worship in the middle of the day, will do the mincha 10 minutes before they're going to do the Ma'ariv. And you'll often, for example, if you go to an Orthodox service on Kabbalat Shabbat on Friday evening, they're doing a mincha for the 10 minutes before they start Kabbalat Shabbat. Kabbalat Shabbat we'll talk about next time as well, because that's not part of the central rubrics. But if you happen to be at the Israel Bookshop on a weekday at 2 o'clock, and you are male and Jewish, you will be recruited to come downstairs to say mincha with them. If you're female, you're allowed to go down, but they won't count you. And the reason for that is for people who are, there's enough Jewish community in that area for people who have to say Kaddish for some reason. They know there's always a place they can go for a mincha Kaddish. Then there are 2 additional main rubrics to the morning service, and that is Torah and Musaf. And those are not added in at Mincha. Those are not added in at Ma'ariv. Those are only part of the morning service, and they're only, the Musaf is added only at the time that you've got plenty of time to hang around the synagogue, which is Saturday and holidays. The Torah, which again we'll talk about in more detail, the Torah is read every Monday morning, every Thursday morning, every Shabbat morning, and every holiday morning, and every Shabbat afternoon. However, what you read from the Torah and how many aliyot you give out will change from mornings to weekdays to morning Shabbat to afternoon Shabbat to holiday mornings to holiday times. So there are a variety of different ways of bringing people up, and how much of the parsha will be also is read differently depending on when you're doing it. But I'll be spending more time next week going much more detail on the cycle of the year, the parshiot, why there are 54 divisions of Torah when there are almost never 54 weeks in the year. So we'll do all of that next time. So Deb, that answers the question about mincha. Also, again, there's always warm up. We'll look at those warm-ups next week as well as the Torah. The warm-ups, as you will see on the morning service, are long. The warm-up for the Shabbat morning is even longer. The warm-up for Mincha is Ashrei, and that's it. The warm-up for the evening is even shorter than that. It's a paragraph that starts V'hu Rachum. And that's it in the evening for warm-up. So you don't have to spend a lot of time on learning about warm-up in anything other than the morning service. So very quick overview to that structure. Any questions on the structure part of it?
I guess I wanted to make a comment about the warm-up. So when I was growing up, I focused on the core. It's like get to shul, make sure you get there by the time they're saying Shema, Baruch Hu. And I have in past years really come to appreciate the warm-up, the Shachrit service, the morning prayers, and because that to me is like it. Without that, it seems it plays an enormous role, at least for me, in being.
And that's why I try.
I guess I wanted you to speak to that, to the importance of the warm-up.
And that's why I liken the service to a aerobics or sport or whatever. You would not, if you were in a soccer game, or your kids were in a soccer game, you would not expect them to show up as the game begins and have the coach put them in. And they would cramp up and do all sorts of things if they did start right without doing the warm-ups. And I think there is that similarity. If you show up just for the worship, are you really in the state of mind, in the spiritual presence? Are you in a frame of spiritual activity to actually go deeply into what the activity actually is? So yes, there is whether or not you need as much as the rabbis put into a traditional Siddur, that actually is more of why different Siddurs in different movements look different. Not because they didn't think they were important, but they felt that you can overdo warm-up as well as have time for it. So some of it was theological, some of it was cut out. One of the things we'll be seeing in the warm-up is every morning you're supposed to read about the binding of Isaac. Every morning you're supposed to read all about the sacrifices. Reform wasn't thrilled with those things, so it found other ways to warm up. But the warm-up is still part of the structure. And so I'm starting with the middle, but I'm not saying this is where you start. This is where, and to a certain extent, I think that the Siddur may have developed over time for exactly those kinds of recognitions and reasons. That if you only do these things like the Shema twice a day, if you only do the Amidah 3 times a day, you're not really creating community. So you're selling yourself short spiritually, and you're also selling the communal aspect of worship short. So when Reform cut things out, they didn't cut out the structure, they cut out some of the elaborations of the structure. And when different Orthodox Siddurim have things added, again, they're doing it on the basis of what they consider to be the effectiveness of the structure on different movements. So the Amidah in any movement Siddur will always be the first 3, the middle something, and the last 3. But for example, the Reform movement had a problem with, in the first blessing, with Goel, God sends a redeemer to us. And so they changed the word to Geulah. God sends redemption to us. The Reform and ultimately conservative and Reconstructionist also had a problem with the patriarchal maleness of the first one. And so they added the imahot, the mothers. The Reform had God being the Ezrat Sarah, the aid of Sarah, and the conservative and reconstructions had God being Poked Sarah. So again, just a little bit of theological change there. In the second blessing of the Gevurot, God's power is manifest that God can even resurrect the dead. Mechaye Meitim. And the Reform movement had a problem with that, so it changed it to Mechaye HaKol. God gives life to everything. And then over time, the Reform added it back in as an option. Reform ended up evaluating and redefining what Mechaye Meitim means. Is it the literal resurrection of the dead, or is it at times we feel like we are dead and God puts life back into us? So it can be emotional death, it can be spiritual death. And so Reform has said, well, we can reinterpret Mechaye Meitim, which is not something new because Reform has always been reinterpreting. But just to break it to you, so has conservative and Orthodox for the last 2,000 years. Everybody has been reinterpreting, which is why we have midrashim and commentaries. But there's therefore some language change depending on the Siddur, but that structure and the basic overview will be the same in each one. Any other comments, questions on just the central part? Thank you, Sarah. That's, I think, important to say. Was important to say. Yeah, Deb, unmute. Still unmute. There you go.
So either some people daven really, really, really quickly, or they don't read every word during the Amidah. So as you know, I've been sort of feeling my own way. There I am, I'm reading and reading and reading, and people are sitting down. So what are they doing? What's the essence?
Well, I mean, you'd have to ask each one of them after they sit down quickly or slowly, what did you do? I'll tell you a couple of things from the traditional standpoint, and from the some, sort of give you the extremes of the traditional and the Reform, and everything else is somewhere in between. So the traditional view of the Amidah is somebody who really knows the Amidah probably is in fact saying every word. They're just saying it so fast that even if they were saying it out loud, you wouldn't know what they were saying. One of my favorite examples is, of course, listen to Reb Moshe at full speed. I mean, Reb Moshe at full speed, I can't follow his English.
Right.
So many of them may be saying everything, but the tradition says that worship, prayer is supposed to be a combination of keva and kavanah. So keva is fixed. You have to say the words that are there. Kavanah is you have to bring yourself, your person, your own intentionality into. And for someone who has been doing, in a traditional world, someone has been doing the Amidah ever since they were probably 6 years old, 3 times a day, and 4 on Shabbat, and even more on high holy days. The words are so rote that they're not really saying every word, but they are saying it. Every word is in them, but they may be bringing their own intentionality to it. On the other extreme, the Reform movement, which in its early days got out of a lot of the ritual, said that's too much. You can't say all those words, and nobody believes them anyway. And so they stuck in a bunch of intentionality prayers in place of some of the actual words of the prayer. When I work with people who are trying to find their way into personal practice of the Siddur, my answer is, are you saying every word and spending a lot of time? Are you just taking time for your own intentionality within those words and sort of letting the words on the page just sort of glide past you so that you've got some keva? And my answer is yes. Yeah, I mean, you take, and Rav Claudia often will point that out when we get to the Musaf Amidah, especially, what she's really talking to. She's not going to say it because she's not going to mandate to anybody, but she's really talking to the people who have already said the Amidah and Shacharit and don't feel like they need to do it all over again. So the Musaf you can use for your personal intentionality and just sit there. You don't even have to stand for it. The tradition is, yes, you say the morning Shacharit Amidah, and then you say it all over again in the Musaf. And there's some of the words in the Musaf that are different from the Shacharit, just so it can be, oh, not this again. But I find, and often people that I talk to, even of a traditional bent, will say, today, I really need that Gevurot prayer. So I'm going to get through what I need to get through, but I'm really thinking about Gevurot, and I'm going to spend my Amidah time on Gevurot. I need some strength, some boundaries, some whatever. I may be needing Kedusha. I may be needing Modim. I may be needing Thanksgiving. So there's nothing wrong with finding a prayer and spending your time with it. There's nothing wrong with trying to read every word. There's nothing wrong with letting the words sort of go by you subconsciously as you flip the pages and then taking yourself into it. What are people doing when they're sitting down quickly or sitting down slowly? I would say probably one of the above at least.
Okay, thank you.
I have a real quick question. So I guess you could do whatever you want. Like if you read the English translation or the Hebrew, but are you traditionally supposed to, not supposed to read the Hebrew, but I don't know, is it?
Well, traditionally it was written in Hebrew,
Right.
except for the parts of the Siddur which were written in Aramaic.
Okay. So
And
is
there
it
are parts of
okay?
the Siddur that are written in Aramaic, and they were written in Aramaic because most Jews, by the time that they were establishing the Siddur, didn't know Hebrew. So the things they really wanted you to understand what you were saying, they put into Aramaic. So if you really want to go by the establishers of the Siddur, the Hebrew, you can sort of just let it go through you and think whatever you want, but you better read every word in the Aramaic so you understand what you're talking about. So yeah, so therefore the English, I mean, there are wonderful Hasidic stories about just that. What are you supposed to do? One of the classics is the poor tailor in the back of the room at services who is mumbling the Aleph Bet over and over again. And one of the real pious Chassid sees what he's doing and berates him for not saying all the words of the prayer and just saying the Aleph Bet. And he says, I'm sorry, I really don't want to offend you, but I don't know the prayers. I can't read Hebrew. I've never had time. I've had to make a living. I know the Aleph Bet. So my prayers are, I say the Aleph Bet and I say, God, you know where those letters go. Please put them in the right order. And the Rebbe hears this interchange and says, silences everybody, says, because of this tailor, our prayers are going to God. So I like that Hasidic story. So if you're praying English and you know what you're doing and you have a good heart with it, you're doing better than the ones who are mumbling the Hebrew and have no idea what they're doing. Their prayers get to God thanks to you.
Okay.
So yes, that's the whole keva kavanah. Yes, you're supposed to do the fixed prayers in the Hebrew, but you're supposed to be in there yourself. And the only way really to do that is to know who you are and where you are with that. So there's nothing wrong with reading the Hebrew and learning it better. But I know I talk to people who say, the more I learn what the Hebrew says, the more I have problems with it. The more I like to make my own translation or find a translation I like or an interpretive passage, because theologically I have a problem with some of the things the rabbi said we had to do. But yes, and by the way, the only time at services, according to a number of classical commentaries, the only time that you have to be quiet at services is when the Torah is being read. And I went, Jenny and I have very good friends in the very Orthodox community up in what we call the shtetl in Brighton. And we were at the Kollel a couple of weeks ago with some very close friends celebrating an Ufruf. And we arrived a little bit late for the opening part of the service. We got there for the Shacharit Amidah, and half the congregation were in the area doing the Amidah, and the other half were wandering around talking to each other. Now, you know, I didn't ask them, did you finish your own personal Amidah? Did you get done quickly so now you can talk? We were also involved with the Orthodox community in Phoenix. I was very involved with them. And often you'd go to a Kiddush. The reason I was involved with them, one of the reasons besides our friends, was there was an inter-Jewish community softball league. And being the community chaplain, I could be on any team I wanted. I pitched for the Orthodox team. And often in the Amidah, you would hear arguments. He was safe. No, he was out. So yes, make sure it works for you and be in it and be with it. And we'll talk about at a future session about what's the difference between communal prayer and personal prayer, because there are times in the worship service that are designed for personal prayer. Any silent Amidah is actually designed as a personal prayer. But there are, in the warm-up parts, in the Birkat HaShachar, in the morning blessings, there are blessings that are often said at home traditionally and are in the synagogue service for those who didn't say it at home. But they're actually, and one of the ways to know whether you're in something that could be personal prayer or something that could be communal is whether that particular part of the service requires a minyan. And I haven't talked about that in our structure because the Shema and the Ahavta were personal, not minyan-based. The Amidah is both personal and minyan-based for different parts of it. So do as it works for you. And I would encourage you, as Sarah found, to get there a half an hour earlier than you usually do if you're not there always earlier. And by the way, for me at TBZ, part of the warm-up is Torah study at 9 o'clock. And we're going to see that Torah, in fact, Torah reading and study is one of the rubrics of the central portion of the service on morning services. And for me, the warm-up to the Torah service is the Torah study.
Mm-hmm.
So there are different ways to warm up, but it doesn't hurt to try some. All right, so I'm going to stop the recording at this point.